Coming up today on LinkedIn News Live, we're looking at where the money is in the clean energy space and how you can get in on the billions that President Biden wants to spend to address climate change. Plus, how one entrepreneur is trying to replace New York City buildings with green power. All that next. Hi, welcome to LinkedIn News Live, where the business conversation begins with you. My name is Nina Melendez, and today we are talking green, money and energy, and the intersection of the two. Right now on Capitol Hill, President Joe Biden is fighting to pass a $2 trillion infrastructure plan that addresses everything from roads, manufacturing, jobs, and climate change. The hope is in part to move the country away from its reliance on fossil fuels while creating jobs. So how can you get in on that $2 trillion investment? Today, we're talking with two guests, one who built a business with a green future in mind, and another who says that opportunities aren't necessarily where you think they are. Let's start with Donnell Baird. He is the CEO of Block Power, CEO and founder of Block Power. Donnell, welcome to the show.
Great, glad to be here.
Great to have you. So Block Power, I'm going to say it vaguely and then you correct me. Block Power replaces antiquated heating systems in old residential buildings with clean energy. Is that right? What do you want to elaborate on?
Yeah, that's right. We want to turn buildings into Teslas. We want buildings to move away from old fossil fuel energy equipment in the same way that Tesla is moving cars off of antiquated fossil engines. We want to move the buildings from fossil fuels to all 100% electric equipment. There's health benefits, there's environmental benefits, there's job creation benefits, makes the buildings more valuable. That's what we're up to. So we analyze and finance and install all electric modern systems.
So you rely on it's solar power panels, right? So solar panels and heat pumps, if that's correct, right?
Yeah, we want to put in the heat pumps. The heat pumps are like an air conditioner that provides cold air, but in the winter it can reverse itself and provide hot air. It runs on 100% electricity. So that means it's a great opportunity to provide electricity from green sources like rooftop solar or utility solar or utility scale wind power. That is what allows us to move buildings to 100% green energy. It wasn't possible, 10 years ago, but it's possible now. So that's what we're up to.
So you founded Block Power in 2014, and I'm curious how the interest in this has changed in the past 6 years in renewable energy, in retrofitting old buildings with clean energy. What have you seen?
There's been dramatic changes. When I was coming out of Columbia Business School in 2013, I barely graduated. One of the first investment pitches we made, a prominent angel investor in New York, he took out his BlackBerry in the middle of my presentation and just, started checking his email and ignoring everything I was saying. And afterwards I confronted him about it. And I said, look, man, an entrepreneur trying to get started. You didn't even hear me out. And he said, you know what? I'm sorry. I lost so much money investing in green energy in 2011 and 2012 that I can't even emotionally listen to a green energy pitch. We were told by early VCs out in Silicon Valley that they'd lost so much money that they had a rule to never invest in green energy investments back in 2014. And now that's shifting. You're seeing, hyper net worth, ultra high net worth individuals, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, from their family offices are investing in clean energy. Chris Sacca, our lead investors, Mitch Kapor and Kapor Capital, Andreessen Horowitz. These are traditional VCs who are looking to make financial returns, of course. They want us to IPO, of course, but we also got to have a social and environmental impact.
Hold that thought really quickly. I want to say hi to some members who are joining us in the stream. We have Marco from Spain, Dolores from Dallas. Good to see you, Dolores. Joey from Canada. If you have any questions for Donnell, ask away. Donnell is the CEO and founder of Block Power. And Ashk says, you've got a fan, Donnell. Ashk says Block Power is doing an awesome job, constantly following their work from India. So you've got a fan all the way in India. Donnell, you mentioned that investors were not interested in green. Anything green energy was blacklisted. I read somewhere that you had pitched to hundreds of investors before anyone actually gave you the time of day. For entrepreneurs who are watching, how did you get through that? Any advice for them?
I basically we spoke to 200 investors before we got our first yes, so it was 200 no's. People got up and walked out in the middle of meetings. They wouldn't even let me finish my presentation, so it was pretty brutal. There's a lot of rejection. I think that if you're an entrepreneur, you need to prepare yourself for rejection, particularly if you're innovating early enough before your ideas are popular, which is where the real value gets created. You need to prepare yourself for a ton of rejection. And so what I did is I told myself was my goal every day. I'd get up out of bed and I'd look in the mirror and say, your goal is to collect 2 or 3 more no's today. Like, you got to get yourself into the meeting. You got to get through the pitch. And if they say no, they say no. You go home, you'll learn from the feedback, you'll learn from the no, and then you wake up the next day and try to do the same thing. So one foot in front of the other. You got to believe in your vision, and you gotta believe in yourself. And beyond that, you got to have confidence that if you've done the rigorous analysis of the market and of your product and of what your customers need, that you're seeing something, you're seeing a business opportunity way before anybody else sees it. That means you're actually on the right path. So now it's like dating, right? You just got to find the right person for you. And you're not looking for 7 people unless you're polyamorous. You're looking for one person, right? Who's gonna share your vision that you can build a company around.
That's a great analogy. I'm going to use that in the future. Speaking just pragmatically, Donnell, when you were going to these buildings and you were, pitching the idea of completely gutting out their old heating systems, what were some of the concerns that building owners had?
Well, building owners need to be educated on the new technology. So if you think about, some of the questions people have about buying Teslas, all electric, is it going to work? What if there's no gas station nearby? Do the batteries work? All this kind of stuff. And so people have questions anytime there's a new technology. We focus on the early adopters, people who want to have the smartest, greenest, healthiest, most profitable home. We want to help them do that so they can show off to their neighbors, hey, I got the greenest home on the block and I've increased my property values by 11%. We want to target those folks who like to be on the cutting edge, who understand the way the trends are going, who understands that green is the way to make money, the way to increase the building's value, to reduce energy expenses and increase profitability of the building. That's who we focus on. In low-income communities where we focus, there's a lot of lead, there's a lot of asbestos, there's a lot of mold. All of this is public health detritus that hasn't been mitigated because of the legacy of a lack of environmental justice. There may be communities that have experienced redlining and couldn't access to finance. And so there's a lack of maintenance in many of these buildings. What we want to do is train and hire local people to go into these buildings, not only install cutting edge clean energy, but also remove the lead, the asbestos, the mold that make the buildings unhealthy. And now that the buildings are healthier, they're greener, they're more efficient, of course, they're more valuable. And so once customers understand that full value proposition, we find that they're super excited about it. No one wants their kids to grow up in a house with mold and asbestos and lead.
As far as the energy goes, why is the heat pumps, or why are the heat pumps and the solar panels more energy efficient?
It's just a new technology. I mean, you remember when cell phones first came out, and you got Michael Douglas on the beach with this giant cell phone the size of his head, and now you got a tiny cell phone the size of a credit card. The technology's advanced. The size of computer processing chips decline year over year. I forget the law, but there's a law in Silicon Valley that says, the cost will decline, the size will decline, the computing power will increase. So as computational power gets lower and lower and lower, what we're really doing is putting in a smart, modern, all-electric computing device into your building. And the technological advances on the hardware side that happen year over year and have been happening for the last 10 to 20 years allow these systems to be way more efficient than a gas system or an oil system that was designed 50 years ago, right? So it's just modern technology being applied to the often and long neglected and ignored heating and cooling systems in buildings. Normally, these are things that only plumbers get excited about, but we want to make it green and sexy, so we're excited about it.
Green and sexy, love it. I have a question here from Kyle, who wants to know if there's a difference in doing this type of business in underserved communities, which is where you do the majority of your business right now.
Yeah, so in underserved communities, there's extra engineering costs, there's extra construction costs, and there's extra financing costs, right? Because the buildings have been so neglected, they actually overconsume fossil fuel energy per square foot relative to the same building in a middle-class community. Because there's been a history of neglect, a lack of maintenance, the buildings are hyper inefficient. So per square foot, they overconsume energy. So you gotta put more engineering resources into it when you do your analysis. You have to put in more construction analysis in order to remove the lead and asbestos and mold because it's hazardous material. So you got to get the hazmat suits. You got to have specially trained workers to remove all that stuff. And then, of course, in communities that are perceived as being a poor financing risk or having limited access to capital and credit, there's extra interest rate costs due to the perceived risk. And so there's extra financing costs. So what Block Power does is we say, screw it. That seems like a really hard problem of greening buildings in low-income communities. There's not a bunch of competitors lining up to do it. What a great opportunity for a startup to show up and build a huge business across millions of buildings with very few competitors. So that's what we're up to.
Donnell, I have one more question for you from someone in the stream. Yeah. Alfred asked, what's available for consumers interested in green energy projects?
So, what I would tell you is we've built on our website at blockpower.io, we've designed like a 10-minute quiz that you can fill out. It'll ask you a couple questions about your home, your building. You fill out that quiz for 10 minutes, and we're going to give you a set of recommendations around great consumer products that you can use to reduce your carbon footprint. The green buildings, all the electric buildings that we're talking about, can reduce your greenhouse footprint overall by 60%, 70%, right? So the most significant thing you can do to reduce your greenhouse gas footprint is green your building or green your office or green your kid's school or green your local library. Because in New York City, buildings contribute 67% of greenhouse gas emissions. And across America, it's 30%. So oftentimes, greening your building is the most important thing you can do from a greenhouse gas mitigation perspective, even more important than buying a Tesla. And then there's all kinds of other products that we recommend. Air quality sensors, smart thermostats. We got great manufacturing partners where we can give you discounts and great recommendations as to how to green your whole comprehensive footprint.
Donnell, I wish we could go on. There's lots of engagement on the stream, but I'm going to unfortunately have to leave it at that. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course. Good to see you. Glad to be here. Bye.
That was Donnell Baird. He is the CEO and founder of Block Power. And for more, you can check out his LinkedIn page and you can check out his website for all the cool stuff he's doing around New York City and hopefully the United States. I want to bring in my next guest, Gordon Johnson. Gordon is the CEO and founder of GLJ Research. Gordon, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Nina.
Gordon, it's so good to see you. You are honestly one of the smartest people that I know, so I'm happy to be able to pick your brain today.
I don't know about that, but okay. All right.
We were just talking with Donnell about green energy, and recently the International Energy Agency came out with a report that said that renewable energy was the only energy source that grew last year. And we know that's because of COVID-19. I want to get your thoughts on whether we're going to see this kind of growth post-pandemic.
I think we're going to continue to see growth, but I think there's grave and mass misconceptions out there. First of all, I want to address Tesla. Look, when you say Tesla gets away from the combustion engine, goes from ICE, internal combustion engine, to electric, that's correct. But roughly 70% of the U.S.'s energy comes from coal-fired power plants. And when you plug that Tesla into the light socket, if you will. You plug it into the wall. You're getting that power from a coal-fired power plant. So when you simply say, hey, Teslas are electric, they're better than ICE cars, internal combustion engine cars, you need to look at the overall aspect of where all the energy comes from. All the way from mining the lithium batteries, where you're not only are you using child labor, but you're destroying all of the land around it to mine that very dirty, if you will, lithium to put in those batteries, to the power that essentially powers the electric cars. There's been studies done that suggest you have to drive roughly 60,000 miles, 50 to 60,000 miles in a Tesla versus an ICE engine car to offset the dirty power use. So I think that's something to keep in mind. One other thing I want to talk about, if we're talking about renewable energy, we're talking about solar and we're talking about wind. There was recently the Paris Climate Agreement, where China effectively did a wink and nod and said, hey, we're going to reduce our CO2 emissions. Here's the facts. In 2019, China emitted 27% of the world's CO2. In fact, and the next biggest emitter was the U.S. at 11%. In fact, in 2020, China built more coal-fired power plants that emits more CO2 than the rest of the world combined by a factor of 300% higher than everyone else combined. Point being, renewable energy is very expensive. We'll get into this. But if we're going to do it and China isn't, all we're doing is essentially putting a retroactive tax on the poor who have to subsidize all this expensive renewable energy for the rich. And there's no real benefit to the environment other than, basically poor people having to pay more for electricity. So I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there.
So actually, let's look at all the renewable energy sources, right? We've got hydropower, we've got solar, nuclear, wind. What, in the next 5 years, where are the opportunities going to be?
Well, listen, President Biden and his quote unquote infrastructure bill, really what it is it's the Green New Deal, but it's in fact more aggressive than even what, AOC and some of the others wanted. Ideally, right, if you take a step back and you just say clean energy, right, everybody's for that. But you have to look at quote unquote the science. Think about this. California has been the biggest installer of solar in the United States. 2009 to 2019, California's energy costs have increased 6 times more than the rest of the United States. The benefit that they've gotten is businesses are leaving California. Why? Because they're replacing natural gas-based energy sources and nuclear-based energy sources with solar. What that means is natural gas and nuclear, distributed baseload power, meaning you get the same power all day, no matter what. Solar, you only get it when the sun's shining. So effectively what's happening and what's caused blackouts in California is when the sun goes down, you have to switch to other energy sources. Solar, wind, all these renewable energy sources that are based on the environment, right? The sun, wind, etc. They require fossil fuels, but when you make that switch, it's very expensive. So what California had to do last year is they didn't have the power to switch to, so they had to import a bunch of power from other states. Because we had the heat wave, those states didn't have the power to give, and thus you had blackouts. This is a third world country, fourth world country problem you're having in the most developed country in the United States. We saw a similar issue.
Jordan, but it's like, take countries like Iceland and Norway, for example, 2 countries that completely use renewable energy for their electricity. They're not having blackouts like this. Is it a question of population, of heat? I mean, obviously California is a little warmer than Iceland and Norway. What are your thoughts?
Right. So I don't think Iceland and Norway are 100% renewable. That's just not possible right now because the battery technology is nowhere near there to get to 100% renewable. I guarantee, I don't know Iceland and Norway specifically, but I do know Germany. Germany has made a multi-billion-dollar investment in renewable energy. Think about this. So when Germany made the big investment in renewable energy, they touted this to the world. And at a bunch of different UN events, it was thought that Africa was going to basically leap over natural gas and go straight to renewables. And then later on, Germany had to effectively state, last year they had to state in 2020, we're not going to hit our CO2 emissions because we can't decommission these coal plants because the renewable energy isn't as reliable as we thought it was. It's been a big bust in Germany where they're having to import power from Russia, natural gas, and they're having to import nuclear power from France. I mean, think about this. I'll give you some statistics. So you have Germany, France is 86% nuclear. Germany's 39% nuclear. Germany's electricity is 1.7 times more expensive than France. You have nuclear produces 4 times less carbon pollution than solar farms. Solar needs 450 times more land than nuclear. And the list goes on and on. If we really want to get to zero emission power, we really want to reduce carbon emissions and do it in a way that actually people can live and not pay high energy prices, we think nuclear is the answer. One last thing, and we could continue to have questions, but the reason why the U.S. had a big reduction in CO2 emissions was not because of renewables. It was because of the fracking that allowed for natural gas power. And because we replaced a lot of those coal-fired power plants with natural gas-based plants, that's what caused the big reduction in CO2 emissions in the United States. So I think that people are being misled and pushed towards solar, which, by the way, 90% of the solar panels are made in China. So those jobs that President Biden's promising, those jobs are emanating in China, not the United States.
We actually have a chart on this. Let's pull up the chart on where in the thousands solar panels are being manufactured. This is pulled from the International Renewable Energy Agency. So we've got, as you can see, China is, combined all the other countries, China surpasses them in solar manufacturing. So if you want to go into solar, essentially, manufacturing jobs are not here in the U.S. for solar manufacturing.
That is correct. It's not.
But there are other opportunities. Tell us about those.
What's that? I'm sorry?
There are other opportunities other than solar manufacturing.
Yeah, no doubt. I think where the bulk of the jobs are going to emanate is in basically installing panels on the rooftops. So I think there will be jobs there. But I think it's been a big hoax, and maybe that's not a great word to use, but I don't know what other word, to say that you're going to create all these jobs in the United States. When you have companies like Sunrun and Sonova, these companies basically position themselves as big solar companies that are going to create big jobs. What they're doing effectively is they're like an arb between a solar developer and the private market. They're constantly raising money in the United States via the equity market. They use that money to effectively buy solar panels in China, bring them to the United States, and put them on your roof. So there are roofing jobs created, but the real sustainable manufacturing jobs that I think, are forced, we're being forced to subsidize this stuff. We should be making it here in the United States, not in China. So China's all for, going to the Paris climate change and giving a wink, wink, nod, no guarantees, but saying, yeah, we're going to be zero emission by 2030. Meanwhile, they're building more coal-fired power plants in the entire world combined by 300%. So they're not meeting their targets. And again, renewable energy, California, they're the biggest renewable energy state in the United States. 2009, 2019, their energy cost has risen 6 times more than the national average. The reason is because when people talk about solar so cheap, they're just talking about the cost of the power at 12 o'clock when the sun's the highest. They're not talking about the cost to switch to other fossil fuels. They're not talking about the transmission lines that need to be built to really make solar usable. They're not talking about the battery storage that's exorbitantly more expensive than traditional forms of energy. When you include that, there's no doubt solar is way more expensive than other forms of energy, and you can see that with what's going on in California. So I think people need to take a step back, not listen to generalities. Like your last guest, when you asked him, why are you more efficient? And he just says the energy's more, energy's more. You can't, you got to get into the science. You got to get into the numbers. Because listen, Nita, really, seriously, my brother in California, his energy costs have exploded over the past few years, and they will continue to explode. He had to deal with rolling blackouts last year because of the use of solar power, in the place of natural gas. This is not efficient.
I'm glad you're bringing this up. I don't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry, but I do want to take a very quick minute and say hi to a couple of people who are joining us in the stream. We have Wesley, who's joining us from New York, and Ellie in New Jersey, and Stephen in New Jersey. Thank you so much for joining us. We also actually have Donnell, who is backstage, or Donnell Baird, who was on earlier backstage, and he disagrees with you a little bit. We've got a couple of people in the stream as well, but this is why I love having you on, Gordon, because every time I speak with you, I feel like I learn something new. My eyes kind of get open a little bit. But
yeah.
Donnell, I would love to have you.
I guess my question is, Gordon, are you saying that solar, the economists, investment banks, Wall Street, the energy industry, oil companies, everybody is wrong, and solar energy does not actually cost less than like coal? Is that your?
I'm saying that 1,000. I can't say 1,000%. I'm saying that 100%.
Why would the coal industry itself say that coal is more expensive than other forms of energy? Why is the coal industry itself divesting from coal plants?
Right. Let me address
the private sector and
you want me to address that?
The
that's a
American
great
economy
question.
and the global economy have decided that renewables are cheaper. That's facts. I don't think you can just make stuff up and come on LinkedIn Live.
Darnell, give him a chance to respond. Go ahead, Gordon. What's your take on that?
Darnell, when they say that, what they're referring to is the levelized cost of energy. It's called the LOCE, or the levelized cost of energy. And effectively, what they're looking at when they talk about levelized cost of energy is the cost of solar effectively at the peak of the day. But they're not including all the other costs involved with solar, like switching over to natural gas when the sun goes down, building those transmission lines that you have to build to do AV versus non-AV power. The cost of the rolling blackouts. Those costs are a direct result of solar. There's a bunch of costs that aren't included in the LOC analysis that the EIA does. And by the way, if you call up the EIA and say, hey, is solar cheaper than coal? They'll tell you it's a very difficult calculation.
No, they don't say that. They'll say the reason that America is moving away from coal is because burning coal is a stupid economic business. That's why coal companies across the country are going bankrupt. And if your argument that solar is not cheap because the cost of gas lines is expensive, that's also just a dumb argument.
I
think you guys finish up the session and I'll jump up. Thank you.
I don't want to get into calling anything stupid. We know how much the cost of solar is. I've been studying this for years. But again, you don't have to take my word for it. Call up the EIA. It's a public organization. Call them up and ask them, say, hey, when you do your LOCE analysis and you look at the cost of solar versus wind versus coal versus natural gas versus nuclear, are you including the cost of transmission? Are you including the cost of blackouts? Are you including the cost, right? Solar shares those transmission lines. So you have to include that in the cost, right? You got to get the solar from the house or from the solar plant to the grid. Are you including, the cost of, when the solar panel blows up? There's so many other costs that aren't included. But let's take a step back. Look, the price of electricity in California is up 6 times more than the national average, 2009 to 2019. What does California do that other states don't do? Solar power. So this isn't even really debatable. You can look at the same analysis in Germany, where their cost of electricity, they've done a ton of solar, has increased exponentially more than the entire rest of the European Union.
Gordon, but isn't part of these costs natural upfront costs that happens with R&D? And ultimately, once the technology gets better and improves, solar will not cost as much and there won't be so high of a risk.
Nina, so the cost of a solar panel when I started covering the solar industry was about $4. We're talking about 25 cents now. And yet and still, so the solar industry has been making this argument that we only need 2 more years of subsidies. I remember in 2008, we only need 2 more years of subsidies and we'll be at grid parity, meaning we're at parity with the grid. I argued back then in 2009, I continue my report. I said you can give the solar panel away for free and the cost of solar will still be exorbitantly more expensive than the cost of natural gas or traditional fossil fuel. The reason is very simple. If you do solar, right, when the sun goes down, where's your power come from? You need to get it from somewhere else. So you have to basically import that power from another state/country, and that significantly increases the cost of the power. You need to make sure your grid is able to go from, this intermittent peak load power, when the sun goes down, to distributed base load power every single day. That requires grid upgrades, consistently grid upgrades. So if you look at any country, right, the reason why Africa has not done solar is because to force solar on Africa, you would literally send them back into the Stone Ages, because solar is not a reliable form of energy.
So Gordon, very quickly, what is the solution? I think there's a lot of people in the stream who are saying, okay, we know you're bullish solar, you're negative solar. What is the solution? I know
The solution is simple. It's nuclear. You can store all the nuclear power in the world. You stack up on one football field stacked, I think it's 20 feet high. Nuclear is 0 carbon emission. Everybody talks about, oh my God, it's so dangerous. Fukushima, nobody died from radiation. If you look at 3 Mile Island, only 15 people died. It's the safest form of power in the world. And really what's happening is you have all these solar lobbyists who come in like your prior guests, and they make these very aggressive comments. But all I ask them to do is just simply look at the science. You use far less land. You have a distributed baseload power in nuclear that's zero carbon emission. And with SMR technology, recent technology, you have something that is extremely safe. France is 86% nuclear. Their energy costs are 1.6 times less than in Germany, and Germany's importing the nuclear from France. It works, it's real, and the science supports it. That's the answer.
Great. Gordon, we have to wrap it. We've already gone over. It was really great speaking with you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Great talking to you too.
Passionate conversation. That's why I like talking to you. All right, thank you. That was Gordon Johnson. He is CEO and founder of GLJ Research. Well, thanks to everyone for joining us. Tomorrow, my colleague Caroline Fairchild will be discussing diversity in the toy industry and how the diversification and representation has helped with brands' bottom line. I'm Nina Melendez. Thanks so much for watching LinkedIn News Live.